I was somewhat forced to play football my senior year of high school.
Presenting Curtis Martin for enshrinement into the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Up the middle inside the 10. Curtis Martin in the National Football League.
I grew up in a really horrible environment where all of my friends were either getting killed or getting in trouble or going to jail. I told the story in my Hall of Fame speech about how I had a gun to my head and the trigger was pulled several times and no bullet came out.
I was learning about life through football, and it was the first time in my life that I ever committed to something and stuck to it.
The graveyard is the richest place in the world because so many people died, full of so many ideas and potential and all this talent that was never tapped into because they didn't maximize their lives. Let me say the most fulfilling thing that I've done in my life. It wasn't going to the Hall of Fame. It wasn't playing in the Super Bowl or any of that stuff. My greatest accomplishment in life for me was...
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. But this podcast isn't about ALS. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I'm a father of 5, married for over 35 years, a New York Times best-selling author, an NFL first-round pick, and a practicing attorney. This is Nothing Left Unsaid, where my son Troy and I sit down with extraordinary people for raw, honest conversations about life, its toughest trials, and greatest triumphs. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Today's guest is a man whose legacy runs far deeper than the football field. Curtis Martin is an NFL Hall of Fame running back, 5-time Pro Bowler, and 6th all-time rusher in NFL history. But stats don't capture the full picture. Curtis is a man of remarkable faith, humility, and purpose. Curtis, you've even said that you never really loved football and that it was more of a vehicle for something else. What drove you to become one of the greatest who ever played the game when you didn't even love it?
Well, you know something? I was somewhat forced to play football my senior year of high school. I grew up in a really horrible environment where all of my friends were either getting killed or getting in trouble or going to jail. And my mother told me to do something after school. And the thing that just came most natural for me was football. Now, I really didn't like playing football in gym class or something like that, or recreationally. I enjoyed it, but in a very organized way, playing for a team, I just didn't really have an interest in doing that. The high school coach was also the phys ed teacher at the high school. So he had been asking me to play since I entered high school, but I just was reluctant to do so. But when I did, it was literally just to keep me out of the neighborhood for an extra couple of hours. And that senior year, I ended up, breaking all these records and getting scholarships all over the country. And so I just stayed at home because I didn't think football was going to last. So I went to Pitt. Um, Long story short, I ended up, getting drafted in the third round. And, true story, when I got the phone call, and it was Bill Parcells. He says, "Son, we'd like to know if you would like to be a New England Patriot." I told him yes, and as soon as I hung up the phone, I told everyone else that I didn't really want to do this and that I didn't think this is the way I wanted to spend, my life, however long it lasted. And my pastor happened to be at the house, and he said, "Well, Curtis, maybe all of those wonderful things that you say you want to do for other people, maybe football is just a vehicle that God has blessed you to do those things." And it was almost as though a light switch came on. And so, because of the bigger purpose that I started to see that football could play in my life, that's what made me actually commit to all of the hard work, all of the training, all of the pain and everything, because I believed that the better I did on the field, the more impact I could have off the field. So that was what really drove me through everything to ultimately have a Hall of Fame career.
What got you that? I guess as it sounded like you had it maybe even when you were in high school, and like how did you get that? I guess feeling of purpose so young.
You know something? I don't know that I even at that point had a feeling of purpose. I'm a very goal-oriented person. If I say I'm gonna do something, I'll get locked in on it, and I go at it pretty hard until I accomplish it. And so once I decided that football is going to be the vehicle that's going to really enable me to do what I really want to do, I had developed just a passion for helping people, especially it started out helping people in the neighborhood that I came from. And I started realizing through college how I inspired other people. And then with this opportunity to go into the pros, not only would I be able to help people out just from an inspirational standpoint, but I knew that it would also give me the ability to actually have a physical, tangible impact, because I would hopefully earn some money and be able to make a difference in people's lives financially as well.
I love football, but I also saw it as more of a vehicle to achieve my other dream of becoming an author. It's different, but we both wanted to make sure we used the game and didn't let it use us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You grew up in Pittsburgh in what you've described as a dangerous environment. What do you remember most vividly from those early years, and how did they shape the man you became?
Well, something, someone asked me this question actually. I don't know if you know or have heard of a guy named Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
He wrote the book, You Start With Why. Very good friend of mine. He asked me what was the first and most vivid memory. It's when he was helping me discover my why. And he asked me what was my first and most vivid memory. And I told him that I remember being 4 years old, and my father left when I was 5. But from the time I was born, and I think around 4, where you start really realizing what's going on, my father was extremely abusive to my mother. And at a very early age, I felt like I became the man of the house because it was my goal to protect her, or I felt like it was my job to protect her. If he was beating her up, I knew he wouldn't hit me, so I would just run and jump on top of her, and he wouldn't hit her anymore, and he never hit me. And so that was where I really started remembering like what was going on. And my most vivid memory was when I was 4 years old. It was probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and we lived in like a project type of environment, like low income housing. And it's about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and we're all, awakened by this huge pounding. And it was my father just trying to kick down the door. And in this neighborhood, everyone can hear it, and you could just hear him yelling, if my son isn't out here in 10 seconds, I'm going to come in there and kill you, and he's talking to my mother. And you just hear this constant pounding. And I just sit up in the bed, and I'm 4 years old. I'm really panicking. And my mother comes rushing in the room. She puts this little red hoodie on me that I have to this day. And she takes me downstairs and sends me out of the back door. Now, when she sends me out of the back door, I still have to run through an alleyway and everything to come around the front to try to stop my dad from getting in the house and what I hear him saying, killing my mother or harming my mother. And so that is my most vivid memory. And I just remember how fast I was trying to run to get to him before he got to my mother. That is the most vivid memory that I have growing up in that environment. And the second one is when we found my grandmother murdered. I mean, brutally murdered. And I've told the story several times before, but my mother literally had to see her lying in the bed with a knife in her chest and a broken neck and blood everywhere and eyes wide open. It was a horrific scene. And so those are probably my two most vivid traumatic memories.
Oh my gosh.
But I have a lot. I have 1,000 of them though.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
horrible. Yeah, and the reason you said like you didn't want to do, your mom wanted you busy after school was the neighborhood. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
where you grew up was pretty rough, but it sounds like the whole area was pretty rough.
Yeah, the whole area. By the time I got out of high school, um, I could very easily name 25, 30 friends right off the tip of my tongue. People who I was pretty close with, not who have died, but who were brutally murdered or shot or killed or in some form or fashion. And I mean, now I don't even know how many people I know that have been murdered. But I'm very grateful because I've had way more than 9 lives, and I really feel like God's been watching over me because there's so many other people who were in my place, in my position, even not in as not in the proximity that I was, and other people ended up dying and I didn't. And so I'm just very grateful. I'm probably one of the most grateful men that you'll meet. And I'm just literally grateful to be alive. So everything else, football, fame, money, like it's all extra to me. I don't treat it that way, but I look at it as a bonus to life because for me, I was just grateful to be alive.
I got two things. And first of all, the Simon Sinek, I'm a pretty big fan of his. And I just sent this to my dad maybe 2 days ago. He just had a clip. He went on a podcast and he said, and this is exactly what you're saying. He said, we always decide in our brain, like there's always the next thing we got to get to the next thing. He said, what if we just decided we already won the game and everything now
Yeah.
and that's exactly what you're saying, really, right?
Yeah. I've won. I mean, it's interesting because now that I'm in the business world, uh, I do a lot of negotiating and a lot of negotiating with people who are, much more experienced than I am. But what's interesting is that I find that so many people get so caught up into the negotiation. It's almost like everything is, dependent upon this negotiation. And I tend to have a very relaxed approach about it because regardless of what way it goes, it's not the end of the world. Like you said, I've already won. And I've really enjoyed living life from the perspective that I've already won. It makes all the difference in the world. And what it does for me is it gives me a peace that is just it's so deep and it stabilizes me so much that it's almost hard to explain. You could have told me that I would have $100 billion before you could tell me that I would have the level of peace that I have, just in my heart and my mind.
That's amazing. I'm so I've only known you for 2 seconds. And I'm so happy you have that piece coming from your background. That's unbelievable. Curtis,
Yeah.
what stopped you from going down that road when you were in those neighborhoods and friends getting killed and single mother after 5 years old? How did you stay out of all that?
You know something? In those environments, and that's what a lot of people may not understand, it doesn't matter. I've seen some of the most innocent, best kids in the world just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they're no longer here. And so when you live there and you don't have the means to be outside of it, there really is no not being in it because you're in it just when you wake up and go outside. Like the environment is it, and so there is no escape. And what I found was that I was just really good at navigating between and I grew up in a very gang infested area. I always thought gangs were, there's no way in the world I'd be in a gang. Like, fraternity, that just is not my uh, cup of tea. But I realized that I've always had a knack for bringing peace into a situation. I mean, it could be two rival gangs, and I can speak to the leaders of both of them and kind of bring some peace to a situation like that. So I've just always been somewhat of a Switzerland um, when it came to a lot of those situations, which I believe saved my life a lot of times. And there's been many times where there's no other way to explain it other than miraculous, or, God protected me, and I told the story in my Hall of Fame speech about how I had a gun to my head and the trigger was pulled several times and no bullet came out. And then the one time that the gun wasn't pointed at my head and he pulled the trigger, the bullet came right out. And so, like I said, I already won.
Your story about the gun misfiring is like something out of a movie, but for you, it was real. How did surviving that moment change the course of your life?
You know what? Even more so because I've had other moments like that. But that moment, I'll probably say, unfortunately, didn't change my life. And I think that by that time, I was so used to it. I was so used to my life being on the line. Like, my mother made a statement that as a parent in that environment, every time your child goes outside, you're not 100% sure that that child is going to come back. And being the child, you literally live that way. I mean, to make it past 30, 35, like 35 is almost like a senior citizen in my environment. And so one of the things that helped me a whole lot, and I don't know how it clicked in my mind at such a young age, but I realized that if I wanted to live a better life than what I saw, then I had to do something different than what I was seeing. Right. So everything that I saw, I had no positive male role models. The first positive male role model I had in my life was Bill Parcells when I got to the NFL, or at least the first person that I really looked up to. Um, and so for me, at a very young age, I realized that I just had to go in the opposite direction of everything that I saw around me. So it's almost as though I feel like I had to learn how to live life in reverse. Just go in the opposite direction of everything that you see, everything that you're experiencing every day. And that kind of that guided me towards the right direction.
Did that wisdom though, like for a kid to have that is obviously extremely rare, right? And you grew up in like I always feel like I knew I grew up lucky, but you grew up in like it's like almost like you and I grew up in different worlds, really. But
Hmm.
for someone in your situation to have the really, I mean, it's the only way to phrase it, I think, is wisdom. The wisdom to say, I basically need to do the opposite. Was that from your mom, from the church, just something in your own head? Like, where did that come from?
No, I didn't grow up in church. I didn't grow up with, like I said, in those environments, the guidance is usually a very frustrated single mother, or um, the gang leaders or the drug dealers, or those are usually the leaders in those environments. And it's rare that you have a positive role model. And the problem is that even if you do come across a positive role model, it's not something that's consistent because they're not in that environment.
Mhm.
And so I developed this passion to be that positive role model in an environment like that. And you asked how I learned to think that way. I think a lot of it came from, so I said by the time I was 5, my father was gone, and my mother, we were so poor she couldn't afford a babysitter. And there was a babysitter who would charge $10 a day, who lived a few doors down from where we lived. But my mother couldn't afford an extra $10 a day, which would come out to like $50 or $60 a week that she just didn't have because she worked like 2 and 3 jobs. And so I had to stay in the house. She taught me to stay in the house since my father had left, because he used to work night shifts. So when I got home from school, he would be there. But now that he's gone, when I got home from school, she had tied a key around my neck with a shoestring. And I knew how to let myself in the house, how to make myself something to eat. And my mother worked 2 and 3 jobs at a time, so she didn't get home till around 8 or 9 o'clock every night. And I was so scared to stay in the house by myself that there were these big windows for all the, you know, apartments that were joined together. And I used to just sit in that front window until my mother came home every day. And so I had a lot of time to think. I got a lot of time to see a lot of things that were going on. And maybe my little mind was analyzing things for the couple of years that I had to do that. And eventually, when I was 7, you know, in those project type of environments, a lot of times the older kids will look after the younger kids and we'll all walk to school together and walk home from school together. And so we would all walk to school together. But on the way back, when I was 7, I started breaking off from the group and I would go to the grocery store and I would stand outside and wait to see an older lady or older man or older person or something coming out, maybe struggling or carrying their groceries. And I would offer to carry them for them to their cars and put them in their cars. And outside of that, I would go knock on random people's door, which I can't even imagine doing today. And I would just ask people if I could shovel their snow or rake their leaves, you know, and I'm only 7 years old. But when I get home, I would have maybe $8. Some days I would have $12 if I was out there long enough. And I would pay for my own babysitter because I was so petrified of staying in the house by myself that it was worth it. And I find that from back then, I started understanding how to solve problems, you know, and to this day, even everything that I'm doing now, a lot of it stems from my ability to see clearly how to solve a problem. I think I'm a good problem solver. Like, you know, in my business, they talk about the CEO, chief executive officer, and all that. I call myself the chief problem, solver, the CPS, because I do believe that I have a knack for solving problems and figuring out difficult situations.
I feel so damn guilty I ever complained. Man, I think I don't want to go off on a rant here because I could, but I think
No, just whatever. Like I
I think
say, I'm
everything
notes
happens for a
time.
reason.
Yeah.
And it's like telling you that with the shit you had to go through that young, it's like I'm talking from the cheapest to the cheap seats. I'm thinking about I have a 4-year-old son and I have a 6-year-old daughter and I have younger kids too, but you were right in that age range. Like
Yeah.
I can't even, like, it's like breaking my heart thinking about that. It's terrible. Curtis,
Something, man.
yeah,
It's like when you're in it, you don't really know it the
yeah,
way we know it now when we can look back on it. Like I wasn't going through anything exceptionally bad back then.
yeah.
For me, it was literally just the way life was. And now that I'm more mature and wiser and I can look back on it, you remember how when we started this conversation, you said, man, I'm lucky. You said you were lucky growing up because I feel the exact same way. I feel so blessed and lucky. I feel so fortunate to have gone through what I've gone through because the character, the wisdom, the learning, the mistakes that I've had to make, the things that I've had to overcome. I had to become as much of a master of getting out of the worst situations in the world. I mean, where I'll tell you one of the scariest moments of my life. The gun to my head and the trigger being pulled, that was not the scariest moment of my life. So I'm 14 at this time. When I was 14, I looked a lot older. I probably looked around 18 years old. Um, and I carried myself very mature. You know how when we're younger, we think we're much older than we are, right? But I was a pretty mature 14-year-old, I think most people would say. And in this little town that I grew up in, we had the highest murder rate per capita in the country during the time that I was growing up. And there was this festival that they called the Arambe Festival, I believe. And it was the one day that there was supposed to be no violence, no crime or anything in the neighborhood. And we went to Dairy Queen. We were down there, and it's everyone's outside. And I took my girlfriend into Dairy Queen to get an ice cream cone. And we come out of Dairy Queen and we're walking down the street eating our ice cream. And next thing you know, you hear this rumbling, like a stampede of people. And we look back, and it had to be 40, 50 people running towards us. And so my instincts was to protect her. So I grabbed her hand, threw down the ice cream, start running really quick because I wanted to get around the corner and put our backs against the wall so that she wouldn't get trampled or I wouldn't get trampled. And so we do that, and we're standing against the wall with our backs. I said, just stay here, just stay here. And the crowd comes, and you hear like all the stampeding towards us, and they get right to the corner, and they turn the corner and almost run past us. And then someone noticed us, and he says, there he goes. And they all come back, and they surround us. And there's this huge circle around us where there's no way out. You can't even see through the crowd. It's so thick. And our backs are against the wall. And then this guy who's like 19, 20 years old comes to the front of the crowd, and he looks at another guy. He says, Carlos, is this him? And I'm sitting there saying, like, me? And this guy, Carlos, he's coming through the crowd, and the crowd is partying. And when I saw Carlos, I wanted to just die. But Carlos comes through, and he has his bike in between his legs. He has no shirt on. He has on some ripped up jeans and some Converse. I remember it like it was yesterday. And all these tattoos all over his body. But the thing that scared me the most is that he had a cut that you could tell he had surgery from this ear all the way across to this ear. And it was kilo. It was like really thick on his head. And he comes through the crowd, and he looks at me holding my girlfriend's hand against the wall. And he says, yeah, I think that's him. I said, you think? You can't be thinking, man. Like, I don't know what y'all talking about. I don't know. I've never seen you in my life. I've never seen you in my life. You think? And he says, yeah, I think that's him. And the crowd starts to close in on me, and the kind of the leader of the crowd. And he's like, Carlos, are you sure? Are you sure? I was like, I think so. And I'm telling you, these guys have knives. They have bat. I mean, I'm about to get my brains beat out. Like I would rather take the shot to the head. I was going to die a horrible death, or at least be in a totally. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. And the crowd is like closing in, and this guy is just trying to confirm with Carlos that I'm that guy. And I said, Carlos, I've never seen you again. I've never seen you in my life. He says, yeah, don't try to act like you don't know me now. You see what you and your brother did to me? This is from y'all. I said, man, listen, I am a single kid. Like, I don't even have a brother. I don't have any siblings or any. I'm an only child. Nah, don't try to, and I'll never forget him saying, don't try to act like it's not you now. He said, I don't even believe that you had the nerve to come around my hood. He said, karma is a B. And he said, and now you're gonna see what karma and they're getting ready to just all, and I'm saying it's like 40 guys. And I've seen situations like this. You don't live in those situations most of the time. And instinctively, what I did saved my life. I threw my hands up and said, hold on, listen, I'm letting y'all know right now that y'all gonna wake up tomorrow and realize that y'all killed the wrong person. I said, but just one thing before y'all do whatever y'all gonna do. Just one thing. And the leader of the guy said, what the F you want? What the F? I said, man, listen, y'all let my girl go across the street and y'all do whatever y'all gonna do to me. And I'm standing there 14, and I'm looking him right in the eye because I couldn't show any fear or anything. I said, I'm letting you know, y'all gonna find out that y'all killed the wrong guy tomorrow. I said, but just let my girl go across the street, and then y'all just do whatever y'all gonna do to me. And I'm looking him right in the eye like this. And he says, well, tell her ass to go on. And she's holding my hand and crying and squeezing, and I'm kind of like pushing her away. And she was a cute girl. She had on some tight pants, and so I realized that she was going through the crowd. They parted the crowd so she could go across the street. All the guys were looking at her butt and everything. By the time they turned around to focus on me, someone came through the crowd this way who is a really close friend of mine, who's like a cousin, but lives in that environment and knew all those guys. And he said, is this the guy that y'all think did that to Clark? That's not him. This is like my little cousin. And he puts his arm around me and walks me right out of the crowd.
Oh my gosh.
And it's moments like that now that I'm much more mature, I count my blessings, and it keeps reiterating to me, Kurt, you already won. You already won. You know you should be dead. I've had way more than 9 lives. I've already won, man.
Holy cow.
If I didn't have what I have, if I didn't play football and I was just working a 9-to-5 job, if I was, Uber driver or Fed, I already won.
You and my dad got to link up. My dad he still writes books with his eyes. You guys got to link up to do a kid's book. It could inspire so many people. And you've got stories that when you were telling that story, I was like, it's like I was watching a movie.
Well, man, I tell you, man, and you know something? It's moments like that. Like every time I had one of those moments, it's almost as though there was a little jewel that I took away from it that I realized was part of the foundation of who I am today. But what I learned in that situation was not to, in that situation, I probably should have been thinking more selfishly. But the fact that my concern was just let my girl go. I realized that throughout my life, like I've always been somewhat of a protector. I've always been someone who is willing to put others before myself. Now, I'm not going to be, just frivolous or, stupid with it. But at the same time, I've learned how to put others before myself because, like I said, I've already won. And all this is bonus to me. And I really enjoy it. I feel like that's a part of my purpose.
By the way, the hesitation of you stopping the chaos to say, just let her go, bought enough time for your best friend / cousin to come in and save you.
Yeah. And that's the jewel that came away for it. Had I been thinking selfishly, I would have just tried to take off running and break through the crowd or something like that. But because of that moment, and it was only maybe 10 seconds, to have her get through that crowd gave enough time for this person to come through the crowd and save my life.
Like they say, everything happens for a reason. Your big heart saved your life. Curtis, you once said that you'd rather be known for your character than your stats. How do you live that out day by day in a world that often glorifies the opposite?
Yeah, you know something? You said something key in the question. How do you live it out day by day? And I think that's the key, day by day. I'll say this, and I've said this previously when I was speaking to people and, maybe giving some advice. My superpower is consistency. I'm far more consistent than I am talented. And even when you look at my football career, I was somewhat of a model of consistency. I wasn't necessarily the Marshall Faulk or the Barry Sanders, but one of the things that Parcells told me, he said, I knew no matter what, I was going to get 1,300 yards from Curtis Martin per year. However he got it, that's what I was going to get. So consistency has been my superpower. And I enjoy being consistent, because I think there's a compounding effect when you've been consistent long enough. It just grows and grows and grows, and it multiplies. And then you start to see that consistency spill over into other people's lives. It's almost like filling up a cup as much as you can. And then when it starts to overflow, other people get to enjoy it. And so that's somewhat my approach. I take being a role model, I take being a standard of conduct. of conduct. I take that very seriously. I don't take it lightly. There's some of the younger guys who are coming up through the NFL. I enjoy being a good example for them, and that's something that is important to me.
It's funny. I was looking at your stats before this, just like out of curiosity. I watched you play and all that, but it was basically every year from like for like however many years in a row, 10+ years in a row. It's just like 1,100 to 1,400 yards, no matter what.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And something. One of my favorite statistic, because I don't really keep up with them and didn't when I was playing, but my favorite statistic is when I was 31, I was the oldest running back to ever win the rushing title. But what goes beyond that is that when you look at that year, I almost rushed for 1,700 yards. I didn't have one run over 25 yards. All my runs were 25 yards or under.
Yeah.
And so to me, that points to the consistency.
That's awesome.
But I had more runs over 12 yards than anyone else in the league. But I didn't have one run over 25 yards. Yeah.
I always remembered you as being one of the most consistent players in the league. Hey, when you founded the Curtis Martin Job Foundation as a rookie, that tells me you already had a sense of a mission when most players are just thinking about staying healthy. Where did that clarity come from?
Well, you know something? I think it started back when I mentioned earlier when I didn't want to play, but, the guy there told me that this was the way or what I've been blessed with to do all the wonderful things that I said I wanted to do for other people. So I literally came into the NFL thinking about how am I getting out of the NFL? And I also had the thought, well, while I'm here, because think about in college, I was injured every year. So that was the knock on me was that I couldn't stay healthy. And mainly it was because in college, I still wasn't taking football serious. I didn't work out. I didn't lift weights. I didn't do any of that. And it wasn't until I saw the bigger purpose in football that I started taking it seriously and started working out. So when I came into the NFL, there were two things that were important to me. Setting myself up from a business perspective for the rest of my life, using this platform or however long this opportunity lasted, using it as a vehicle to set myself up for later. But more importantly, to set myself up to be able to have the impact that I wanted to have on people, on society, on the world potentially. When I came into the NFL, because my goals weren't Super Bowl and make as much money as possible and whatever else. Of course, I'm a team player, so I always want the most and the best for my team. But I still have this journal where I wrote on this page my one goal for my entire career. I can't honestly say that I ever had a different goal. And that one goal was to finish the game with a name that was worth more than the money I made. Like that was my one goal because that was my North Star. And that determined how I conducted myself on the field as well as off the field. And to be able to do the things that I'm doing today would not be possible if I didn't have the character, the trust, the name that I have today.
It's normal to you, but it's so unique to think like an 18, 19 or whatever, 21, 22-year-old kid thinking that way. It's just crazy.
Well, that's all that time I had to spend in the house by
In the
myself,
window.
afraid, So, yeah.
You rushed for over 14,000 yards. You were a machine, but what were the hardest yards, the ones that meant something more?
The hardest yards? You know something? What was the hardest for me was everything that occurred off the field. Um, Again, I look at the analogy of on the field, off the field. I almost look at football as an analogy to life. I think football is like a game of life, actually. I've learned a whole lot of lessons from football. I'll never forget that Parcells told me that there's a big difference between routine and commitment. He said, son, he said, most people do the same routine over and over again, but few people commit to the next level. And so, like, what was difficult for me was not wanting to play football, not really enjoying to playing football, but forcing myself to give my all at it. Like in my mind, when you say what was the hardest thing for me, and I know it's not yards or anything, but what was the hardest for me was giving my all to football and not really liking it, not really wanting to do it. But, and this is kind of the hacks that I would use on my own mind. I would say, all right, Kurt, but listen, if you could do something that you don't like to do at the highest level, just imagine how that's going to empower you to do everything else that you really like to do. And so that would become my driving force. You know, I would want to conquer my own self. Like I competed against myself more than I competed against anyone. You know, one of my favorite competitors was Ray Lewis and Bruce Smith. I used to love to play against those guys because those were like the hardest two guys for me to play against. And I just find that when I'm in those situations, it brings out the best in me.
I got to ask, just because you brought it up, I wasn't going to go all football here, but playing against Ray Lewis, what made you say he was one of the hardest to play against? What did he do? I mean, obviously he was a phenomenal player, but was there anything specific that maybe people don't notice at home watching on TV?
You know something? And there's one other person I want to add to that list, Zach Thomas.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, this is the slowest. He looks like the most unathletic guy. He's not fast. He's not even quick, but he's so smart. Like, he's almost like an NFL middle linebacker savant. He just knows where every play is coming. He's going to beat you to the hole. And so the way I had to play and how I had to be at the top of my game to, in my mind, defeat Zach every time we played them, that was really difficult. Now, what made Ray one of my hardest competitors is that he had what Zach had, except he was phenomenally gifted and talented, you know, so that made it that much harder. He was like a Zach Thomas with all the ability in the world.
Yeah, Zach Thomas, you played twice a year for your whole career pretty much, right?
Yeah. I was so glad when he made it into the Hall.
Yeah.
Those are two of the all-time great linebackers. Curtis, like you mentioned, you were the oldest player ever to win the rushing title. What did that year, in 2014, teach you about endurance, aging, and grit?
You know something, my teammates used to joke with me because everyone assumes that I was never hurt because I was so consistent, right? But most people don't know that I played with some extreme injuries that most of the time the doctors would tell me that I needed to miss the rest of the season. I can't tell you how many seasons the doctors told me I should have missed. I probably should have played, you know, I played 11 years. There were at least 4 or 5 times that the doctors told me I needed to stop playing and go get surgery and miss the rest of the season. So for me, I was, that whole consistency thing was really important to me. And I wanted the second 6 years of my career to be better than the first 6 years of my career. And I was on the path to doing that until that 11th year when I got injured and had to retire. But I always took pride in being the oldest, the one who everyone doubted, the one who people didn't think was going, you know, had any more gas in the tank. I wanted to come out and win a rushing title. And what's really interesting about that year, I made all of my codes to the facilities, to the stadiums. You know, we have codes that we have to push to get into the facilities for meetings or practice and all that. I made my code 1700 because I wanted to be reminded that I wanted at least 1700 yards that year. And I ended up finishing with 1697. I missed it by 3 yards.
Someone's got to go back and watch the film and find those 3 yards. They shorted you.
Yeah. I'm sure I got cheated somewhere.
What were some of those injuries you overcame?
The injuries, I'll tell you, it wasn't my worst injury, but it was one that concerned me the most. I'm not a big worrier. You know, I accept life and I'm very realistic. You know, it kind of is what it is with me. And I don't harp on what I wish it could be or anything. I just deal with what is. And I was coming off of my injury in New England that last year of my contract before I came to the Jets. And I had a pretty bad injury. I had a double hernia where I had this hernia from the beginning of the season on both sides. And I played the entire season with it. So by the end of the season, I could hardly walk because it started ripping my growing area and everything. Like, so I had so many tendons and ligaments that were pulled or torn, and plus my stomach was ripped on both sides. And so after I had to have this, you know, very like a double hernia surgery, as well as some repairs on my growing area. And back then, the technology wasn't what it is today. Now they could do that same surgery with just making 3 little dots. I have 3 cuts that are all as long as my finger, like right beneath my belly button, right below my waistline, actually. And so that was the injury that I was recovering from when Parcells brought me to the Jets. And that's why there was so much discrepancy about why he would not only bring a running back, which was a position that they didn't need, but bring one that was coming off of injury, bring one that was coming off the type of injury that I was coming off of.
And the Jets already had 1,000-yard rusher.
Yeah, they had Andrea Morrell, who had rushed for like 1,300 yards the year before, you know? And so, but Parcells gave me one of the best compliments, and it's hard to get a compliment from Parcells, especially when you're playing for him, because he wants to make sure that you know, have a certain level of respect and everything. But we're in a press conference. I'll never forget. Remind me to go back to the question, but this is a kind of a sidebar. We're in the press conference, and one of the reporters says, "Bill, I just want to ask the question that's the elephant in the room. Earlier in the year, you told us that you needed 7 other positions before you needed another running back. Running back was the 8th position on the board that you guys needed. Why would you give up all that you had to give up to get Curtis, pay him all the money that you had to pay him, and you have an all-pro running back in Adrian Morrell?" And I'll never forget Parcells saying, "You know, when you've been around this game as long as I have," he said, "you notice certain things that people like yourself would never notice." You know how Parcells, he always had to take a jab at you. He said, "You notice things that people like yourself," and pointing to the guy, "people like yourself wouldn't notice." He said, "You know something? The reason why Curtis is here," he said, "because watch what I tell you. Curtis won't just be the best player on our team. He'll be the best person on our team also." He said, "and he's going to make all of these other guys that much better. And you'll see it play out in our season." And in that year, that was the year we went to the AFC Championship, which was my first year here. But for Parcells, it was unlikely for him to give you a compliment like that, especially publicly. But that meant a lot to me. That meant a lot to me. And so I felt so indebted to him because that move changed my entire life and the trajectory of my life. And so 2 weeks later, we're in camp and I'm running the ball and I make this cut. And I don't know, like if you feel behind your knees when you're sitting down on each side, you can feel those really thick cords on each side of your, on the inside and outside of your knee, behind your knee though, behind your knee. I popped those like a rubber band, those thick cords. And you could literally feel one part of it down in my calf and the other part was up in my hamstring, up in my thigh. And I remember being on the training table and there was a mirror where I could see behind me. And I was laying on my stomach while the trainer was working on me and trying to see how bad the injury was. He didn't know that I saw him, but Parcells came in and was standing at the door. And he looks at the trainer, and the trainer makes sure that I'm not looking, but I'm actually looking out of the corner of my eye. And I see Parcells do like this to the trainer. He says, "So is he going to be able to go or is he not?" And the trainer was working on me. And then I see him through the mirror. He looks back at Parcells and he goes,
Double two thumbs down.
And I was supposed to get surgery to repair that, and I was going to miss the entire season. But instead, I told them, let me just see if I can run with it. They said, Curtis, there's no way you can run with this. You would be in so much pain. I said, well, will it get worse? No, Curtis, it can't get any worse. You need to get surgery to repair this. Okay, well, listen, let me just try. Let me just try. Slowly but surely, I started going through training and start jogging. And, they were wondering how I was even walking. I had to wear like all this stuff. I had to come in at 5 o'clock every morning just to get treatment, just so that I could practice. It was one of the most grueling times of my entire career. But I ended up starting in that first game and didn't have a good game the second game, but I had my breakout game, my third game of the season, and I ended up playing the rest of the year with that injury. And by the time the season was over, I don't know how, but the ligament was back, and that was just one of the situations that it was literally the most pain that I think I've been in my life. I would be in the huddle and my teammates would see me with tears in my eyes because I was in so much pain, almost on a daily basis, not just in games, but in practice. But I challenged myself. Like for me, if I could go through a practice and make it through a full practice, in my mind, I defeated that pain. And back to the point that I was originally making, my teammates used to always joke with me because I would say that everything is mental. You just got to conquer it in your own mind. It's all right between your ears. Just settle it within your mind, and then you can possibly deal with it. And so that's always been my approach.
Your Hall of Fame speech wasn't really about football. It was about pain, purpose, and forgiveness, especially forgiving your father. What made you decide to share that publicly?
Well, what made me share it publicly is because I think that forgiveness is something that human beings as a whole struggle with. And I had a firsthand front row seat on a woman who had every right to be as bitter and unforgiving and resentful as possible because my father was, number one, he was extremely abusive, physically abusive to my mother. My mother would go to work sometimes with a black eye and have to wear sunglasses or have to wear long sleeve shirts in the summer because her arms were bruised. I remember my father taking a cigarette and holding her locked in the bathroom. And threatening to burn her hair, set her hair on fire with a cigarette. And then when she wasn't sane or whatever he wanted her to say, he would take the cigarette and put cigarette burns on her legs that she still has to this day. And, I would kind of watch and hear all this stuff happening. And so my father, he was also strung out on drugs. And as a result of all of the drugs and alcohol, I think it affected him mentally. And so he struggled with mental illness also. And it got to the point to where I was a teenager and I decided that I didn't want to have that anger or bitterness that I saw in my mother. My mother was one of the most bitter people that you'll ever meet. And I remember telling my mother one day, Mom, I'm being very honest with you. I only know that you love me because you're my mother. I don't know that you know how to show love because of all the stuff that you've been through. But I know and I trust that you love me. And, I used to get a lot of beatings when I was younger. And for my mother, that was the only way she knew to discipline me. And she just had in her mind that she had to be extremely hard on me because of the environment that I was growing up in. So the reason why I'm so grateful for that, and I got beaten so much, man, and literally I just came from Pittsburgh a few days ago because it was my mother's birthday. And this is what, 40 some years later, my mother still, Kurt, I just want to apologize to you again because I didn't have to beat you like that when you were a kid. She literally just said that to me about 3 or 4 days ago. But that was her way of keeping me disciplined because there were so many kids in that environment that didn't listen to their parents that ended up dead or ended up in jail. So her putting fear in me was the way she made sure that I would always listen and respect her. So I thank her for that today. Um, so my father had, you know, not even after he left when I was 5 years old, he just turned to a life of drugs. It wasn't really in my life. My mother became even more bitter because he never really did anything for me. My mother said, in your entire life, your dad got a check from Social Security for $9,000 and he gave you 50. And he gave me $50 for you. She said, and that was the only thing your father has ever done for you since he left. And so she was this angry, bitter woman. And one day we see my father, and this is after I'm in the NFL. This is 22 years later after he left. I was 27 years old. And we see him at the bus stop. And I say to my mother, there go my father right there, Mom. And she said, yeah, and? And I said, well, I mean, I'm sure he's catching the bus to go home and we're going in that direction. We're going to ride right by his house. Why don't you ask him if you need a ride? And she just starts cursing me out. I'm not effing picking that mother effer up for all he did. He's not sitting in my car. She just goes off on me. And I said to her, well, Mom, um, how long are you going to hold this against him? I said, look at that man. He's not thinking, he doesn't care one bit about what you just said. He's not even worried about any of that. He looks like he doesn't have a care in the world. And you're sitting over here so bitter. Like, are you going to stay like this all of your life? I said, Mom, I've never spoken to you in a disrespectful way. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm just being honest with you. I believe that you have cheated me out of what a son would receive from his mother as love simply because you've been so bitter and you've been so bitter because of that man right over there. And it seems like she just didn't even know how to react to it. And she just said, well, ask him if he need a ride, And so I rolled down the window and I said, hey, Dad, you need a ride? And he said, sure. So I wanted to make my mother sit right next to him. So I got out of the front seat. I got into the back seat. And now this is the first time that they've sat side to side since I was 5 years old. And they ended up having a really good conversation. And he said, I'm just so sorry for the way I was. And I was out of my mind. I was strung out on drugs. He said, my mother's name is Rochelle. He said, Rochelle, I was one of the biggest drug addicts I know, and I know a lot of them, And so when we dropped him off at his house, he walked up these steps and he looked back down and waved. And my mother waved by, and she had a smile on her face. And I got out of the back seat and got in the front seat. And as soon as we pulled off, she burst out into tears. And I said, "What's wrong?" Because you hardly ever see my mother cry. And she said, "You know what, Kurt? I just feel like I just dropped off a whole big bag of bricks that's been weighing me down since your father left. And I forgive him." And the change that I saw in her life from that moment to where she is now, totally different trajectory. And she is so much more of a loving person. I saw how once she released all of that unforgiveness and bitterness that she had, the difference that it made in her life. There's this, I think it was Harvard or Yale, it was one of them, and they did this study on bitterness. And what they were trying to figure out is exactly why do people become bitter. And so they studied, I can't remember, it was like 600 people for something like 18 years or something to figure out why people become bitter. And the conclusion was that people don't become bitter because of what they experience in life, but they become bitter because of how they remember what they experienced in life. And so I find that when I was able to change my mother's memory of my father leaving us, that's what helped her forgive him, because I told her, I said, "Mom, imagine the man that I wouldn't be if he was there all that time." And that little shift of perspective, I think, is what enabled her to forgive him.
You were wise as a young man. Faith has clearly been a guiding light for you. How has your faith changed over time from the Curtis in his 20s to the Curtis we see now? For myself, my faith has grown exponentially since my ALS diagnosis.
Yeah, you know something? The difference in my faith then and my faith now, I would say, is maturity. There's a verse I remember seeing in the Bible, and the Apostle Paul is talking, and he says, "When I was a child, I thought like a child. I acted like a child, but when I became a man, I put childish things behind me." And so that's what I find. I find that now that I'm much more mature and that my faith has been tested, that I've been through all types of trials and I've had to rely on my faith, that I've had to depend on God when I didn't know what other way there was going to be out of a situation. And then now being able to look back over all those times that I thought I was just, quick or got out of the way. I'm not faster than a bullet. Somehow all these bullets, everything has missed me. Now I realize that it was God protecting me. And so, back where I grew up, if someone saved your life, you were somewhat indebted to them for life. And when I look back over how many times I believe God has miraculously saved my life, it's given me somewhat of an indebtedness towards God. And I know we don't have to repay God or anything, but I have such a respect for who God is. God is like real to me. God, I didn't grow up in the church. So my first experience with God was when, I was 20 years old and I thought I was going to die. I always had this premonition that I would die before I was 21. So I decided, man, let me just go to church and see what this God dude is about and just tell him thank you, because I really believe, and I didn't have any background of faith. My mother, I never went to church or anything. It was just me being afraid of dying and thinking to myself, you know what? I never even told this God thank you. Let me just go to church and tell this man thank you. And that's how God was. Like God was just like I don't know you. I don't know how to communicate with you. So I just went to the nearest church that I heard everyone went to. Um, and I'll never forget sitting there and the pastor asking people if they wanted to have a deeper, better relationship with God. And there was something in me. It almost felt like my seat was on fire. I felt like I needed to get up and go there, but I was way too embarrassed because I knew that people knew me, and I didn't want to look like a hypocrite and all of those different things that enter your mind in that moment. And so I'll never forget standing there or sitting in that pew, and I was in the balcony, and I looked up at the ceiling and I said, "Man, listen, God or Jesus, whoever, like, I don't know about that Jesus cat or whatever, but if you are who, you know, people say you are, look, I'll make a deal with you. I'm a man of my word. If you know, you probably know that. So look, you just let me live past 21. And if you let me do that, look, I'll try to do what you want me to do, because if you're God, you have to be too smart to do something for no reason. So there has to be a reason that you allow me to exist. If you let me live past 21, I don't care if it's a day, I'll try to do whatever it is you put me here to do." And it was just like I was making a deal with someone in the streets. And what I really appreciated about it is that now, in hindsight, with much more experience and intimacy with God, I could see that God accepted me right where I was at. He met me where I was, and you know, I feel as though what's really changed from that time to now is just the level of intimacy. Now, like, God is so tangible to me and so real to me, and my trust in God, um, my belief in what God is capable of, is leaps and bounds from that 20-year-old Curtis that sat in the church and looked up at the ceiling and start talking.
And did that relationship evolve from your, I hate to say it, sounds like, but it's true. It's like just consistency, which kind of your calling card. Is it just you just because on that day when you're 20 and you look up at the ceiling and say, I don't know who this cat Jesus is, but let's make a deal. From that day to today, where you say it's so real, it's so tangible, it's so there's nothing about it that seems that 20-year-old was just like, hey, if this exists, let's strike up a deal. And now you're saying how it's so real to you. What makes that shift? Is it just every day kind of leaning into it, or what did you do?
I don't want to compare God to a woman, right? Or myself necessarily to a woman, but like in a relationship, I really believe that God is more interested in relationship than he is religion. And I'm not against any religions or anything, but I think that, like, God just really wants to be intimate with us. Um, I think that the one thing that I can give God, or you can give God, or any individual can give God that he can't get anywhere else on the planet, is our hearts, is our intimacy. And for me, that's what I want to try to do, because I wouldn't describe myself as a very religious person at all. Like, I'm still that person. When I was on that field, I'll take your head off. In business, I can be as cutthroat's not the word. I could be as shrewd as the shrewdest. But I try to do everything with respect, and I try to do everything a certain way. Um, but I tell you, when you have a relationship with someone, I almost look at it like a relationship with my wife. Even when we got married, I'll never forget the pastor saying, "Curtis, you think you know Carolina, but you're going to really get to know her now that you guys are married. Carolina, you think you know Curtis, but you're going to really get to know Curtis now that you're married. And he said, most people get married to the idea of marriage, and then they wake up to the reality of it. And see, and that's what I feel. I think a lot of people, they get in a relationship with God, the idea of being religious or whatever. But then when that faith gets tested, when you're in those trials, when you're in those times where God is seeing if you're going to trust him, or if you're going to trust in yourself, or trust in your money, or whatever else it may be, I think those are the moments where intimacy is formed. And so I'm the type of person who, when I fear something or there's a problem, I run towards it instead of away from it, because I would rather go through that thing and know that I have God on my side and conquer it and get on the other side of it than to constantly feel threatened by something.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a long explanation for
No,
the question.
I'm so curious. Whenever anybody tells me they feel like they have that experience, that relationship, I always ask, because I have, and this is a personal note, but I feel like I know there's a God. I believe in God, but I don't feel like that how you described it. I don't feel like that. My dad feels the same way you feel. A lot of people, a lot of my friends, a lot of people I love feel that, but I don't feel like in a bad way. I just don't, there's like I don't know. And it's probably it's definitely a me thing, but it's like that step is the part that I don't have or never had, and it's probably me not putting in the consistency, truthfully, because I definitely don't.
That's what it ultimately probably comes down to, man. Because, and look, like I say, I, I have no room to judge anyone. I'm not judgmental or anything. I think that a lot of people never really get to know God. Almost, it was like how I was with football. I would have never known that the potential to be a Hall of Fame running back was in me unless I really applied myself with consistency. It wasn't until I started working out, till I started doing everything that I needed to do to give myself the best chance to become a Hall of Fame player. But it was putting the work in. And I think because we can't see God, we're not touching God or in touch with God every day, that we just take it for granted. And we don't realize all the times that that accident could have happened, that something bad could have happened. But, and a lot of times, unfortunately, what I've seen, and especially for myself, it took me to be at my rope's end to turn to God, because I remember myself saying some of the exact same things that you just said. And
Yeah.
people who used to try to talk to me about God, I used to be like, get away from me with that God stuff. Like, I didn't want to know. And when I look at it from a very honest place, I didn't really want to know, because I didn't want to make the commitment, and so I wanted to just allow my ignorance to be bliss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably pretty accurate. I said to my
But
dad,
hey,
I'm like, I feel like I don't have enough time to, like, I don't have enough time in the day to add one more thing to my plate. And then
uh-huh.
he said to me the comparison of, like, people they're like too busy to hire help, right? Like, and when you're running a
Hmm.
business, it's like
Yeah.
you can't have it both ways, right? Like, you have to be able to stop to hire that, anyways. So
Well,
it,
you know what happened for me? Just one last thing about that. What happened for me is that, I'm telling you, imagine where you are, but I was probably about 10 times worse in my perspective towards God. I was much more vigilant with not being having anything to do with God. And it wasn't until my life hit, I mean, literally rock bottom. And and it was almost like I was so far down that I had no choice but to look up.
Mhm.
And it just happened to be the right time for me. And when I talked about going to church for that first time and looking up at the ceiling, I was at my rope's end.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And so I always say there's no downside in getting to know God,
Yeah.
uh, but there's a downside to not getting to know God.
Yeah.
And so that's just my philosophy.
No, I think it's spot on.
I like that perspective a lot. Curtis, you've stayed away from the media spotlight. Instead, you've built, invested, and quietly given back. What motivates you when no one's watching and the cameras are off?
What motivates me is it's more of who I just am. So it's like for me, I'm just being me now. And that's kind of where I've always been. I started my career with the thought that I could use football for a bigger purpose. And I've just matured in that. And so for me, I've always tried to do things beneath the radar. Even today, as we were talking about the business that I'm in, I tell you, like, I don't want this to be a part of the interview simply because I love to just stay behind the scenes and do what I need to do. Even in my playing career, a lot of people always point out to me that when I would score a touchdown, I just give the ref the ball. I go back to the huddle. No need to celebrate or put on a show. There's something about being discreet that has worked to my advantage. I think that there's a wisdom in being discreet, not necessarily promoting yourself all the time. I'll let others promote me. I'm not going to stop them, but I'm not a rah rah myself guy. Um, I've always been a team player. And so my natural instincts is to promote others and be the one behind the scenes. And I really enjoy that position.
You said set out at the start of your career to make a big impact, and obviously you had literally one of the best careers of all time as a player. What have you done like off the field and that giving back? I know you've done a ton of stuff, but what's maybe a highlight or something in that give back mode that you had that you got to experience that's maybe extra special or extra memorable? Again, I know there's probably a ton, but what's one of
Yeah.
the highlights?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff. I mean, because I feel like that is a huge part of my life. So I almost feel like I'm always doing that. One of the things that I did, well, I don't even talk about that. There was a group that I put together that impacted millions and millions of people that it was somewhat celebrity driven, but there was this whole concept that some of the highest profile people in the world have a hard time going to church or getting help and keeping it confidential. And I had put this group together that enabled people to do just that. And without naming names, just think some of the most famous people in the world, I would get them all together in one room and have someone teach a life class. It wasn't necessarily the Bible or anything. It was like a guy who was like Dr. Phil, but everyone would say like, but better. And
Yeah.
it was so impactful. And the way it was almost like touching one of them, you were touching millions of people, but having 40, 50 of them in a room at one time, it was really, really powerful. But I do a whole lot with drug rehabs because of my experience. So I give a lot there. There was a group of doctors that I would send overseas to do surgeries for free in third world countries. I do a whole lot and did a whole lot with homelessness here in New York and in America. So there's really I created my foundation in a way that allows me to, and I've been the sole funder of it for my entire career. One of the things that I did is I would take 20% of everything that I made during my career and put it in an account. And that was the account that I would use to help other people. And I still do that to this day. And financially, I've been growing to an even, a better position. And so my goal is to give away a whole lot of money, which means I need to make a whole lot of money because I want to, my ultimate goal in life is to get to a point where I can live off of 20% of my money, which means I have to be bringing in a big number, but I want to give away 80% of it. Like when I'm 70, 80 years old, I want to be able to say that I'm giving away 80% of my money.
That's awesome. That's like
Yeah.
Tony Robbins-esque, right? Like
Yeah.
the higher he goes up, the more impact he wants to make. I don't know if you've seen his stuff about like feeding families. It was
Yeah.
like 1 family, 10 families. Now he's at, I don't even know, millions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, you know how some people, they have a near-death experience and they feel like they've been given a second chance.
Yeah.
Well, just imagine the frame of mind if you feel like you've been given like 20 chances. So it's like that. And again, I enjoy the business of it. I mean, I'm swimming in waters with the sharks of sharks. I was talking to one guy and he was saying, "Hey, Kurt, I mean, you're swimming in some real deep waters with some really big sharks." And I said, "No, these are killer whales." And
Yeah.
so I enjoy that part of it. I enjoy all of that. But what I really enjoy is being able to do that so that I can do this.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, like I'm the type of person I'm a tough negotiator. I almost look at that person on the other side of the table. That's Ray Lewis to me.
Yeah.
Now, there's a guy you don't want to negotiate with. Curtis, you've mentored young players, donated millions of dollars, and even helped build parks for kids. What's the most fulfilling thing you've done since hanging up the cleats?
Well, let me say the most fulfilling thing that I've done in my life first. I've mentioned this in my Hall of Fame speech, but it wasn't going to the Hall of Fame. It wasn't playing in the Super Bowl or any of that stuff. My greatest accomplishment in life for me was getting my mother to sincerely forgive my father. Like that was one of the most impossible things that I've done in my life. And, to the point where when he was on his deathbed, when he was dying, I mean, my mother was cooking for him, cleaning his house, different things like that. And so she had truly forgiven him. And I to this day, I feel like that was my greatest accomplishment. And definitely, and for me, one of my most meaningful accomplishments.
You once said when your daughter gives your eulogy, you hope she talks more about your integrity than your touchdowns. What else do you hope she says?
You know what I have 2 daughters now. What I hope that they would say is that their father was the best example to them of what a man should be. And their father was the best example of how a husband should treat a wife because of the way they see me treat their mother. I think that's probably the best outcome that I could have. And also, I want my daughters to say that my father was a man who had a profound respect and appreciation for God and for life. And and my father taught me how to make the most of not just my days, my weeks, but my years and my life. My father taught me not to take anything for granted, not to take one day for granted. One of the things that when my father was dying, he died of lung cancer and it came upon him suddenly. He said, I was walking down the street and coughed up a little blood and decided to go get it checked out. He said, but I'm feeling great. He said, and the doctors came out and told me I had 2 weeks to live. And so when he was on his deathbed in those 2 weeks, like it was the happiest that I've ever seen him. The one thing that I do want to do like my father is to be able to die like him. He died at such peace and such a happy man, especially given all that he had been through. And so I had my phone at the time and I said, Dad, I just want to record you giving me some advice that I can pass on to my kids one day. I said, if you could give me one piece of advice for the rest of my life that I can pass down to my kids, what would that advice be? And he says, Kurt, you know what? As I said before, just last week, I was walking down the street feeling as happy and go lucky as I ever have in my life. I had one cough and I saw blood. I came to the doctors and found out that I have 2 weeks to live. He said, the one piece of advice that I would give you, Kurt, is to never underestimate how quickly things can change. Don't take anything for granted for the rest of your life, and tell your family or your future kids to not take anything for granted, to maximize every single day, because you never know when it's going to be your last. So that's my philosophy. And that was the one piece of advice that I've ever felt like I've received from my father, because, like I said, he's been gone since I was 5. And the only time we were able to have that conversation was on his deathbed.
If someone told you when you were growing up in Pittsburgh that you could achieve all you have, what would you have said?
I would have probably looked at them like they were a little crazy. I think, and it's interesting because I think the first thing I would have did was brought their attention to where I was and who I was at the time. Like you see this, like that doesn't happen from this, you know? But I think that's kind of a life lesson. I think a lot of times we look at what's going on right around us and we don't even see the possibilities that's outside of where we're at. But life is so much bigger. There's so many more opportunities. And what I've found in life is that some of my biggest blessings have come from the biggest problems, and so I've learned to live life in a very fearless way. Someone asked me, they said, Curtis, what is it that you fear? Because you seem like you're kind of full of faith and you're kind of tenacious. And what is it that you fear? And I really had to think about it because, I had convinced myself at a younger age that I wasn't afraid of death. I just feel like it's something that's inevitable and that we all have to do at some point. But my answer to the person's question was that what I know about fear now, I think my fear is actually just being fearful. I do not like to live in fear because I've seen the results of it. And I've seen what it can force people to do. I've seen the warped state of mind that living in fear can keep you in. And there's this principle that I really appreciate. It says, whatever you fear in life creates your boundaries. And so I guess if you fear heights, you'll stay on the ground. If you fear airplanes, you'll drive across the country instead of flying, and so whatever you fear in life creates your boundaries. And, I remember at one point in time, I was able to look back over my life and realize how trapped of a life I was living simply because of fears that I was living in. But once you start breaking through those boundaries of fear, I mean, life opens up to you in a whole different way. And when you start to replace that fear with faith, you just never know what's possible, man. And it's like, for me, I like to go for it. I like to get after it. And you can't do that when you're living in fear.
I've got a whole list of notes. I'm taking notes on this thing. I feel like I'm at the life class here. Hey, I gotta tell both of you guys this too. I did some research here. I used AI. I cheated. My dad announced a game in 1999, November 7th, 1999. It was the Cardinals. You were playing against the Cardinals. My dad announced the game. You had
Oh
38
yeah.
carries for 131 yards.
Oh wow. Wow.
Longest rush was 17 yards. So there you go. There's your note. No more than 25 consistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Curtis, at the end of each podcast, I ask our guests to brag about their families. So please brag away.
Okay. Well, let me start with my mother. And my mother is my hero. I mean, she is literally my hero. This woman has made so many sacrifices for me to be sitting right here today. Had she not forced me somewhat to play football, we wouldn't be sitting here today. Had she not given me the advice and the wisdom, I would probably have gotten killed somewhere. Um, I'll never forget her telling me, she said, Kurt, I found my mother murdered. My sister was killed, and her death was even worse than my mother's. My brother died. All your friends are getting killed. She said, if anything happens to you, they might as well kill me too. And that was what convinced me to play football. And she said distinctly, because Kurt, really, I feel like I'm just living for you, just to make sure that you're okay. And so to this day, my mother is like my best friend. She is literally my hero. I, I have seen her overcome and conquer things that I know she didn't know that she could conquer, but it was simply out of necessity. And so, they say necessity is the source of innovation, or I can't remember how the saying goes, but it's something like that. I've seen her just create things out of nothing, just out of necessity. So I love my mother. Let me then talk about my two daughters. I mean, my two daughters, I know everyone says this, but I mean, I literally don't feel like I could have two better daughters than I do. My wife and I think we've done a good job keeping them off of social media. They don't have phones. They've never really been on social media. And what's good is that my wife and I have taught them to play the way we used to play before we had phones and computers and all that stuff. So most of the time, you'll see them out in the backyard doing something. There's a million art projects around the house because they're always creating, they're always doing, they're writing, they're reading. And I just love the young ladies that they're becoming. But then my wife, I got lucky. I was very fortunate. I was blessed to have a woman that is such a perfect match for me. And not a perfect match as in, like, we just got married and everything worked out and it was all bliss and this and that. No, no. We've been through a lot, but I would rather go through it with her than any other woman on the planet. She is a terrific mother. She's a terrific wife. And I feel very blessed to be married to her.
That's amazing. Curtis, I got to ask you a nerd football question here. You've had such an amazing career. You've played on such great teams, such great coaches, all that stuff. Do you have one play that stands out as like a favorite play of yours or favorite NFL
Yes.
memory or something like that?
Yes. There's actually two, but there's one in particular. We were playing, I believe it was the AFC championship game, or it was the game before the championship game, and we were playing the Steelers. And I'm from Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh Steelers are like gods in Pittsburgh. And, everyone from babies to grandfathers and grandmothers, everyone in Pittsburgh are everyone's a Steeler fan. And so to be playing against them early in my career, this was only my second year in the NFL, and we're playing, and this game is going to put us into the Super Bowl. I had this one run for like 76 yards that uh, it was one of the most defining moments of my career that I always remember. That's probably number one. But number two, this might be number one. I'm sorry, this might be number one. I started out camp as a rookie. I was the fourth string running back. And the senior guy in the room was Dave Meggett. And I'll never forget, he made all of us stand up and introduce ourselves to just the running back group in our own running back room. And for some reason, I ended up being last. And when I stood up, I said, listen, guys, I have a lot of respect for all the men in this room, and we're all involved in this friendly competition to help our team win and be the starter of this team, the starting running back. I said, but listen, I know me. I'm just a young, hungry lion right now. I said, and so I never want to take anything the wrong way, but I just want y'all to know, I hope there's not one of you. I hope none of you, all you guys who are in front of me, don't get hurt. Don't get tired. Don't need your shoestring tied. Don't break anything on your equipment or anything, and you have to come off the field. Because if I get in there, my goal is that no one in this room would ever see the field again. And they all just, they all start like pushing me around. Oh, little rookie, go ahead, and they're joking with me. And when it all calmed down and stopped, I looked down and said, no, but I'm serious. And it's interesting because there was some combination of that actually happened to where I ended up getting the starting job for the first game of the season. And the first game of the season came down to one play with 6 seconds left in the game. We're on the 2-yard line, and Parcells calls me to the sideline, and he says, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yeah, I'm ready, coach." He said, "I'm going to call your play." I said, "Call it." And I go in there, and they give me the ball, and I go to jump over the top, and I can't remember the guy's name, Pepper Johnson. He hits me midair, and I fall back on my feet, but I didn't fall down. And with a second effort, I reached out and stretched the ball across the goal line, and we ended up winning the game. And that will always be one of the most memorable moments of my career.
That's amazing.
Because it was the first game that I ever played.
And the double jump too. Again, it's like my dad said earlier, it's like a movie.
Yeah, and you can still see it online. Like I literally tried to go over the top and got hit, and then reached back out a second effort, and we ended up winning the game.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid-fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
Getting married.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
Myself. Overcoming my past and becoming the man that I am today.
What are you most excited about?
How many people I'll reach ultimately, and the example that I'm going to set, not just for my children, but for a lot of people over a period of time.
What advice would you give your high school self?
Focus on being consistent. Allow consistency to be your superpower. You're not going to be the most talented. You're not going to be the biggest, strongest, the fastest, but consistency is the equalizer of the playing field. And even though you won't be more talented than everyone, you can be more consistent than everyone.
Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
A book that was really helpful to me, and it somewhat describes my life now with the business that I'm in and how it somewhat became successful. There's a book called The Speed of Trust. And it is basically talking about how when there's close relationships and there's trust, there's a lot of hoops that you don't have to jump through. There's a lot of levels that you can just surpass simply because there's trust there. For instance, because of the relationship and the trust that I've developed with a lot of the owners in the NFL and the owners in professional sports. That's what's enabled me to accelerate in the business that I'm in now. So trust, the speed of trust. And there's a book on relationships called Love and Respect. Very powerful book. I would recommend it to anyone in a relationship. You don't have to be married, but it basically talks about how it's a man's duty to love a woman, but it's a woman's duty to respect the man, and how, as a man, we receive love through a woman's respect for us. And he really breaks it down in a way that makes it, as a man, when you're reading it, you're like, that's exactly how I feel. So it's love and respect. It's good.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
I'll say this. I've learned that in life, first of all, you only get one of them. And I think a lot of times, a lot of people spend their lives either hung up in the past or worried about the future. So much so that I think very few people live a life very present. Present at home, present at work. And I find that because of a lack of being present, a lot of times we don't make the most of our moments. One of my goals in life is just to maximize my life. Everything that I was put here to do, I do it. And if I was to say that I have a life goal, my life goal is to die empty. And what I mean by that is that, I've heard a saying that says the graveyard is the richest place in the world because so many people died full of so many ideas and potential and all this talent that was never tapped into because they didn't maximize their lives. And so I want to die empty. I don't want there to be a single ounce of talent, ability, potential. I want to get it all out before I leave this earth.
I've never heard that before. That's a cool one. Writing that down, adding that to the notes. Curtis, before we let you go, this is the real last question. At the end of every podcast, I always ask our guests, like, now that you kind of got a feel for the show and for us and what we're doing, who are a couple of people that you know personally and think we should try to get on the podcast?
I might have to come back to you, but for right now, I would just recommend Emmett Smith.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm gonna selfishly, I'm calling you after this, and I'm gonna ask to Simon Sinek too. If we could get him, that'd be so cool.
Oh, Simon Sinek. That's who I would say you need to have on this. Definitely.
I've listened to
Simon
so many
Sinek.
of his videos.
Yeah, Simon is a beast. You should definitely have him. I think the listeners will come away with so much if you get him on here.
Yeah.
Lawrence Taylor's, who's really interesting? Oh, who you should try to get? Try to get Mike Tyson.
Oh, yeah. Do you know
Mike
him
Tyson.
or no?
Yes. We haven't been in touch recently or anything, but you could probably figure out, you can get to him. But Mike Tyson, he's one of the most interesting athletes, not just interesting athletes, interesting people that I've ever been around. And I've had the opportunity to have some really deep and interesting long conversations with him. And the way he thinks, you would never know it because of the image that most of us have of Mike Tyson. But he is a very intricate thinker. I'll never forget him telling me, and I was only about 23 or so at the time. He said, Curtis, you're a good guy, man. You're a good guy. And I just want you to be careful because there's a lot of people out here. No, he said, because there's a lot of monsters out here dressed up like people. And he said, and I don't know if you're old enough or wise enough to know the difference. And so I just want you to be safe out here, man, because there's a lot of monsters out here dressed up like people. But
So
it's just interesting the way he thinks. I remember talking to him about a think it was Rocky Marciano or one of them who was like his favorite boxers. I said, "Have you ever met him?" No, no, no. Would never want to meet him. Why not? I don't want to meet my heroes because I don't want to see their flaws. I mean, it's just the way he thinks. He's a very interesting guy. So if you can get him, get him.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
It was like the three most, the three most opposite people: Simon Sinek, Mike Tyson, and Emmett Smith.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a hell of a well-rounded crew.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, not just for your time today, but for the way you've lived your life with integrity, humility, and intention. You've shown that greatness isn't just about yards gained or records set, but about using whatever platform we're given to serve something bigger than ourselves. Your story is a reminder that even in a game built on toughness, there's room for grace, purpose, and faith. We're grateful you shared it with us today. I hope God continues to bless you and your family.
Well, thank you so much. And I agree with you. Number one, I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed the whole interview. I enjoyed the questions. I enjoyed getting to know you guys, the little bit of time that we've had together. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and continuing the relationship. You say you're blunt. I love bluntness. I think that's the best way to be. And I would love to get to know you guys better. And if you're ever in New York, or I would love to get together with you guys at some point, whether I have to come there or, you're here. But I really enjoyed this time and enjoyed this interview. Thank you. And thanks for the questions. The questions were great.
Yeah, Curtis, thanks so much. It was really amazing. Thanks for letting us be your teammate here for a couple hours. Hopefully we can, like you said, we'll get together in person and see if there's more we can do.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, guys.